Sunday, March 1st, 2026. If you are listening to this right now, you already know that the world looks fundamentally different today than it did just 48 hours ago.
It really does.
Yeah, we all woke up yesterday to the news that major combat operations have officially begun in Iran. And let's be clear right off the bat, this isn't a border skirmish.
No, not at all.
It's not a shadow war, it's not a proxy exchange. This is the big one. The United States and Israel have launched a massive joint bombing campaign directly against the Iranian regime.
It is a massive escalation. I mean, I've been reading through the situation reports all morning, and the scale is, frankly, it's staggering.
Oh.
We are talking about a shift in the geopolitical tectonic plates that we really haven't seen in decades.
Exactly. And because 2026 clearly isn't giving us a break.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right. We're going to dive straight into this. We've got a huge stack of sources today to help us make sense of all the noise. It is. They're aggregating military transcripts, official statements from the White House and Jerusalem, and some really harrowing on-the-ground reporting coming out of Tehran and the Gulf.
And our mission for this deep dive is to go way beyond the headlines, beyond just list of explosions. Anyone can doom scroll social media for that.
Right. You don't need us for that.
Exactly. We need to understand the strategy here. Why is this happening now? What does a decapitation strike actually look like in practice? Mechanically, I mean. And perhaps most intriguingly, why China's silence is the loudest sound in the room right now.
That China piece is fascinating, and we will absolutely get there. But first, let's unpack the opening move, because the sheer speed of this escalation caught a lot of people off guard.
It certainly did. While tensions have been high since the start of the year, obviously the shift to Operation Epic Fury, which is what the U.S. Department of War has labeled it, marks a definitive change in posture. It's no longer about containment.
Or deterrence.
Right. This is purely offensive.
Operation Epic Fury. Subtlety is dead, apparently. But it all started with that social media video from President Trump in the early hours of Saturday morning. And the rhetoric wasn't just tough. It was incredibly specific.
Very specific. No vague threats about fire and fury this time. The key takeaway from that announcement wasn't just that bombs were falling. It was the message directed specifically at the Iranian populace.
Right.
President Trump explicitly said, quote, "America is backing you with overwhelming strength. Take over your government."
That's the quote that stuck with me, too. Take over your government. It's a direct, unambiguous call for regime change from the inside, supported by force from the outside.
Yes.
And almost immediately after that, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a parallel statement echoing those exact same points. But playing devil's advocate here for a second, we've heard this kind of liberation rhetoric before in the Middle East. Is there a specific reason they think it will actually stick this time?
That is the crucial question. To understand why they are using this language right now, we have to look at the justification they provided in the initial briefing. They cited two main drivers. First, the immediate security threat. Claims that Iran is actively rebuilding its nuclear weapons program and developing long-range missiles capable of striking Europe and America.
Which is the standard red line argument we've been hearing for years.
Right, it's familiar territory.
Yeah.
But secondly, and this is crucial for the narrative they're building, they reference recent history. Specifically, the January protests.
Oh, the January protests. We cannot forget that context.
No.
The reports state that thousands of protesters were killed by the regime just earlier this year. It was brutal. So the argument coming from Washington and Jerusalem is that the regime isn't just a threat to the West, but has fundamentally lost the consent of its own people.
Exactly. It frames the intervention as a humanitarian liberation effort just as much as a security operation. It's a way to legitimize the strikes to the global community. Basically saying, look, we aren't attacking the Iranian people, we're attacking the oppressors of the Iranian people.
Let's look at the how, though, because this wasn't just hitting a few runways to ground their air force. The sources are specifically calling this a decapitation strike.
Yeah.
Let's pause on that term, decapitation strike. It sounds like something out of a Tom Clancy novel, but what does it actually mean in a modern military context? Are we talking about drone strikes on individual cars or leveling whole city blocks?
In this context, it's a systematic attempt to sever the head of the command structure from the body of the military. The target list Warfronts provided is intense. The sources mention massive strikes on Pastor Street in Tehran.
And for those listening who might not have a map of Tehran handy, why is Pastor Street the bullseye?
It's the nerve center. It's not just a random road. It hosts the president's office, the headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, and the intelligence leadership.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of hitting the White House, the Pentagon, and CIA headquarters if they were all located on the exact same block.
So they're trying to cause immediate paralysis.
Precisely. If the orders can't go out, the army can't fight effectively. But it went well beyond Tehran. We have reports of strikes in Isfahan, which is near a major nuclear complex, strikes in Kermanshah, home to a massive IRGC base, and Shiraz, where the Israelis allege there was a massive underground missile production facility.
Underground, so we are talking about bunker busters.
Massive ones. The seismic reports coming out of the region suggest deep penetrating munitions were used. We are talking about ordnance specifically designed to punch through reinforced concrete and explode deep underground.
And here is where it gets really interesting and grim, to be honest. The casualty reports, we are seeing reports from Israeli sources that this wasn't just about destroying infrastructure, they went after specific people.
The list of reported deaths is very high level. We are hearing unconfirmed but persistent reports that the leader of the IRGC, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Intelligence, and the lead nuclear negotiator are all dead.
That is essentially the entire war cabinet wiped out in a single day. That is incredible speed.
It's a massive blow to their command and control. However, there is a nuance here in the sources that we really need to pay attention to, a detail that might actually derail the whole decapitation theory.
Which is?
Iranian state media is reporting that President Masoud Pezeshkian is safe. And crucially, reports indicate that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was moved to a secure location prior to the strikes.
Ah. So the head of state and the ultimate religious authority are still in play, even if all their generals are gone.
Correct. And that complicates the strategy significantly. If the Supreme Leader can still communicate, he can still command the loyalty of the remaining forces. You haven't truly decapitated the regime if the voice of the revolution is still broadcasting. He becomes a rallying point.
The sources mention that this initial phase is scheduled to last 4 days, and they are calling it an all-out approach. American officials told the New York Times this is bigger than Operation Midnight Hammer.
Right.
Which, for context, was the U.S. strike campaign back during the 12-day war in 2025.
Midnight Hammer was a scalpel. It's primarily focused on nuclear sites to set back the program. Epic Fury seems to be a sledgehammer. It's about systemic collapse, breaking the military, the intelligence apparatus, and the political will of the regime simultaneously. It is designed to end the regime, not just to lay a bomb.
So that was the opening move. Massive, overwhelming force. Now, if I'm listening to this, I'm probably thinking, okay, Iran just got hit incredibly hard. They must be hunkering down, trying to survive. But looking at the timeline in the War Fronts report, that is definitely not what happened.
Not at all. And this is where the situation becomes extremely volatile. You might expect a pause, a moment of shock, but Iran fired back almost immediately.
Let's talk about that counterpunch, because usually when you get hit this hard, you scramble to hide. They scrambled to launch. First, they targeted Israel.
Yes. The IRGC announced a large-scale wave of missile and drone strikes. Preliminary assessments show about 35 ballistic missiles were launched at Israel.
35 missiles sounds like a lot to a civilian, but in terms of modern warfare and what we know about Iran's stockpiles, is it?
Honestly, it's a relatively small salvo for Iran. They have thousands in their inventory. This suggests one of two things. Either their launch capabilities were severely degraded by the initial U.S. strikes, or they are conserving their arsenal for a long, drawn-out fight.
And the result of those 35?
Mostly interceptions by the Arrow and David Sling systems. Some hit open areas. There was a report of one light injury from falling debris. In terms of physical damage to Israel, it was minimal. It was almost symbolic.
But here's the big aha moment for me reading through these reports. The retaliation didn't stop at Israel. This isn't just a U.S. and Israel versus Iran fight anymore. Iran expanded the target list to the Gulf.
This is the critical escalation point. If you want to know why your stock portfolio might tank tomorrow, this is it. The IRGC confirmed strikes on American military installations across the region. We are talking about Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra in the UAE, Al Udeid in Qatar, and the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain.
They hit the 5th Fleet. That is incredibly bold.
It is desperate and bold. The 5th Fleet is the projection of American naval power in the Middle East. Targeting it is a direct challenge to U.S. hegemony. But more importantly, by hitting bases in Kuwait, The UAE and Qatar, they're striking sovereign nations that are technically not at war with them.
And it wasn't just military targets that felt the impact. The sources confirmed there was a civilian death reported in Abu Dhabi.
Yes, and that changes the calculus completely for those countries. The UAE and Qatar have tried very, very hard to walk a fine line here over the years.
Right, they host U.S. troops, but they also try to stay friendly with Tehran.
Exactly. They try to maintain diplomatic ties to avoid getting glassed. But by striking them, Iran has forced their hand. The UAE has already called it a flagrant violation of sovereignty.
So Iran, in trying to hit back at the U.S., might have just united the entire neighborhood against them.
It seems that way. Reports now suggest that these regional governments, who have tried to stay somewhat neutral or at least non-combatant, might now join the U.S. offensive. Iran has effectively turned a bilateral conflict into a regional war.
Speaking of regional war, we have to talk about the proxies. This is usually the axis of resistance playbook. When Tehran is threatened, the proxies activate. We usually look at Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hamas in Gaza. What are we seeing there?
Well, let's start with the surprise, the dog that didn't bark, so to speak. Hezbollah has been surprisingly quiet.
Hi. Usually they are the first to jump in with rockets from the north. They have a massive arsenal.
It appears Israel anticipated exactly that. The sources indicate Israel conducted intense preemptive strikes on Friday and Saturday before the Iran operation launched, specifically to blind Hezbollah's detection systems and kill the commanders who would be planning the response operations.
Blinding them, you mean taking out radar and comms?
Exactly. If you cut the fiber optic lines, jam the radio frequencies, and eliminate the guy who holds the launch codes, it doesn't matter how many missiles you have sitting in tunnels, you simply can't coordinate a swarm attack.
So they took them off the board before the game even started. That's a massive intelligence win, if true.
Effectively, yes. They disrupted the chain of command. Hamas, on the other hand, is still considered crippled after the destruction of their infrastructure following the post-October 7th wars. They just don't have the capacity to open a meaningful front right now.
But the Houthis in Yemen, they seem to be a completely different story.
The Houthis are the outlier here. They are the wild card. They have resumed attacks. They broke a previous suspension agreement they had with the Trump administration and have started targeting sea lanes and firing at Israel again. They are the one proxy that seems to be fully engaging, likely because they are geographically harder for Israel to hit preemptively, and they operate somewhat independently of Tehran's direct day-to-day control.
So we have a chaotic battlefield. The U.S. and Israel pounding Iran. Iran pounding the Gulf and firing at Israel. The Houthis shooting at ships. But what about the rest of the world? This is where the geopolitical shadow play gets really fascinating.
It really is. The reactions, and specifically the lack of reactions, tell us a lot about the real state of global alliances right now.
Let's look at the West first. The UK came out and said, we aren't involved, which feels a bit like leaving your friend at the bar right when a fight breaks out.
Yeah, pretty much. London is actively distancing itself. They are saying they weren't part of the strikes, and they want to avoid escalation. This is likely an attempt to protect their own interests in the Gulf and avoid getting dragged into a war that they didn't plan. They want to keep their hands clean.
And EU, Ursula von der Leyen called for de-escalation.
Standard response. The EU is always going to push for stability first. They are terrified of a refugee wave and massive energy price spikes. But the real surprise, and I mean the real shock, is coming from the East.
Let's talk about Russia and China, because if you asked me a week ago, I would have said they'd be screaming from the rooftops in defense of Iran, right? They are the anti-Western bloc.
You would think so.
Yeah.
But look at what actually happened. Russia's Medvedev put out a statement on Telegram saying the U.S. negotiations were fake and claiming the U.S. showed its true colors. But that's it. Just words, no material support, no movement of forces.
But China's the one that completely blew my mind in these reports. Warfront says total silence.
Total silence. And to understand why that is so shocking, you have to look at the calendar. Just 1 week ago, literally 7 days, China, Russia, and Iran were holding joint naval drills. They called it Maritime Security Belt 2026.
They were literally holding hands and flexing muscles together a week ago.
Exactly. It looked like a rock-solid trilateral alliance, a united front against the West. But the moment the bombs actually started falling, it turned out to be theater.
It's like they were acting in a play, and then the theater caught fire, and China just quietly walked out the exit without looking back.
That is a very apt analogy. It gets deeper. The sources reveal a fascinating detail about weapons procurement that Warfront's dug up. Iran was apparently on the verge of finalizing a massive weapons deal with China. They were buying CM-302 supersonic anti-ship missiles.
Those are the carrier killers, right?
They are designed specifically to hit aircraft carriers. They fly low, skimming the ocean surface, and they are incredibly fast, supersonic. If Iran had those operational right now, this conflict would look very, very different for the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. It would be a much fairer fight.
But they didn't get them in time.
No.
No.
And the silence from Beijing now suggests something very pragmatic. They crunch the numbers, they value their trade relations with Washington and the Gulf states, where they get their energy, by the way, more than they value protecting the regime in Tehran.
So when push came to shove, Iran found out they were completely alone. That is a lonely feeling for a regime under fire.
It is isolation in its purest form. And it shows that the anti-Western alliance is much more fragile than people think. It's transactional, not ideological.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now? Maybe you are in Chicago or London or Sydney. You are in the splash zone. Why should you care about what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, do you drive a car? Do you buy groceries? Do you purchase anything manufactured overseas? If the answer is yes, you should care deeply. We really need to talk about the Strait of Hormuz.
The ultimate choke point.
It is the jugular vein of the global economy. Roughly 20 million barrels of oil flow through that strait every single day. That is 27% of the global maritime oil trade.
27%. That is, that's not just a dip. That's a catastrophe if it stops.
It is massive. If Iran decides to, or is forced to, close that strait, or if the fighting makes it impossible for tankers to pass because of insurance risks, supply chains break. Yeah. Immediately. We aren't just talking about gas prices going up a few cents. We are talking about a spike that hits everything.
Explain that linkage for us. How does oil in Hormuz affect the price of a toaster in Chicago?
Energy is an input cost for literally everything. It powers the ships that carry the toaster. It powers the factory that makes the plastic for the toaster. Manufacturing in China, India, Japan, it all runs on that energy coming out of the Gulf. If the energy cost triples, the manufacturing cost triples, shipping costs triples.
So we could see a global cost of living crisis on steroids.
Precisely. And there is a huge political irony here for President Trump. He is launching this attack, presumably to project strength and resolve. But if this war causes a massive spike in inflation and gas prices at home, he's going to be facing furious American voters who are already struggling with the cost of living.
It's a gamble, a massive economic gamble. He's betting he can win fast enough to avoid the economic pain. But let's look at the other side of the coin, the political stakes inside Iran. Can the regime actually survive this?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. There are two main schools of thought here among the analysts in our source pile. Viewpoint A is that the regime is incredibly vulnerable.
The House of Cards theory?
Right. The January protests showed that the people are angry, they are willing to die for change, and the government's legitimacy is at an all-time low. The argument is, if you decapitate the leadership, the fear breaks, and the whole thing crumbles. The people take the opportunity to finish what they started in January.
But there is always a viewpoint B.
Always. Viewpoint B is the rally around the flag effect. History shows us over and over that when a country is attacked by an external power, people often put aside their internal grievances to defend their nation. Even if they hate the government, they might hate being bombed by foreigners even more.
We saw that in Russia during World War II. We saw it in the U.S. after 9/11.
Exactly. Patriotism is a powerful drug. So Trump and Netanyahu are betting on the people rising up. But they might end up uniting them against the U.S., especially if civilian casualties mount. If that bomb hits a marketplace instead of a bunker, the narrative changes instantly.
It is a distinct possibility, and this leads us to the day after problem. This is something that the experts in our sources are very worried about, because let's say viewpoint A is right. The regime falls. Then what?
The comparisons to Libya and Iraq are unavoidable here.
Libya after Gaddafi, Iraq after Saddam.
Yes. In both cases, the West removed a dictator. Militarily, it was a success, but they didn't have a solid plan for what came next. They assumed freedom would just organically happen.
And instead, we got chaos.
We got huge power vacuums, we got sectarian violence, we got mass refugee crises, and we got extremist groups that were in some cases worse than the dictators they replaced. ISIS came directly out of the vacuum in Iraq.
And the critique right now, looking at the sources, is that neither President Trump nor Prime Minister Netanyahu has articulated a clear plan for governing Iran if the regime falls.
They're saying, take over your government to the people. But they aren't saying who organizes the trash pickup the next day, or who runs the police,
Yeah.
or, crucially, who secures the nuclear material.
That's the scary part. Iran isn't Libya. It has a massive conventional arsenal and real nuclear know-how.
Exactly. If the Ayatollah falls, who controls the keys to the stockpiles? Who commands the remnants of the military? We could be looking at a civil war in a country with enough weaponry to level the region. You have Kurds in the west, Balokis in the east, Arabs in the south. Could easily fracture into a dozen pieces.
That is a very heavy thought. So to recap where we are right now, we are in day 2 of what is supposed to be a 4-day initial blitz.
Correct. The operational tempo is extremely high.
The Iranian leadership, the IRGC top brass, is being decimated, though the supreme leader is hiding. The Gulf nations are under fire and angry, and the global alliances we thought were solid, like China and Iran, are proving to be made of paper.
And the economic sword of Damocles is hanging over the global economy via the Strait of Hormuz. We are literally one tanker attack away from a global recession.
It feels like we are walking a tightrope over a very, very deep canyon.
That is a completely accurate description. We're in a fragile moment where the outcome is entirely uncertain. The next 48 hours will likely define the next decade of Middle Eastern politics.
Before we let you go, we want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over. We know the stated goal here. The U.S. and Israel want the Iranian people to overthrow their government. They want a reset.
But history asks the uncomfortable question. If the regime collapses tomorrow, if the wish comes true, and there is no plan for the day after, are we liberating a country? Or are we creating a black hole of chaos that will consume the entire region for decades?
A sobering question for a Sunday. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Operation Epic Fury. We will be watching the situation closely as it develops. Stay safe and stay curious.
Goodbye for now.